Welcome to the Gramophone Classical Music Podcast, this week with your host Hattie Butterworth. I spoke to the mezzo-soprano Kitty Whately about her new album on Chandos, called Horizons, French Melodies. The album is a programme of French melodies from a range of composers, all based in Paris at the turn of the 20th century, and including lesser-known women composers, such as Marguerite Canal, Edwige Herchenroder, and Armande de Polignac. I'm joined today by the mezzo-soprano Kitty Whately to speak about her new album of French Melodies, which is out now on Chandos Records. Hello, Kitty. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, juggling lots of different hats that I wear, but enjoying them all.
So this album's been out now for a few days, which is an interesting kind of time to catch you to talk about it. But I know from this sort of stuff I've been hearing about the album that it's actually been quite a long journey. How does it feel to come and give it to people, kind of see them enjoy this music that you've clearly spent a long time thinking about and immersed in?
Yeah, it's thrilling at last. You know, we started talking about this in the lockdown, like so many creative projects that happened in that weird time that were born from that horrible time. This was something that came into our brains during that period. I run a charity called SWAPRA, and one of the things that we do is look at gender representation across leadership roles in the opera industry. And as inevitably had us looking at gender representation in terms of the composers that are programmed. And for me, because I do so much song repertoire, that's spilled over into my song work. Observing how few women composers are represented on song programs, it's definitely getting better. And the younger generation are much better at this. But it's a conversation that I wanted to take part in. And so our charity SWAPRA, we ran a few workshop days where we took stacks and stacks of songs by women and paid some very talented sight readers, pianists and singers, to come and sing through a load of stuff for us to get an idea of what this stuff sounded like, because it had all been gathering dust in libraries and never recorded. And discovered some absolute gems in there, which I've completely grabbed hold of personally and made several albums worth out of. So it's done me good as well.
Is this the first in that series of music that you kind of discovered throughout that time?
No, my previous album was born from that as well, actually. I made an album of German repertoire with Joseph Middleton, also with Chandos. And we recorded some songs by Margarita Schweikert and Johanna Müller-Hermann, both of whom I think were really, really interesting composers that deserve to be heard about. Contemporaries of Strauss and Mahler, so we also included some Strauss and Mahler on that disc. And this one, on one of these workshop days, we discovered Edwige Herchenroder, and everybody in the room went, "Oh my God, how come nobody's heard of this woman? She's amazing." She was really the sort of the find of the day. And so that's what inspired this album. The original idea was to do a whole album of hers. But, you know, inevitably, in researching her, we ended up learning about other women and thinking about other composers that it would be interesting to pair her with. And so the album ended up being a smorgasbord of French repertoire and not just women, and a program that we're really proud of.
And Horizons, your album, is kind of based in this really interesting period of time in Paris at the turn of the 20th century. What's the sense you get from the music that was being written in Paris at the turn of the 20th century? I know you're in this landscape of sort of Fauré and Saint-Saëns. These are the people that we have heard a lot of song from. But what do you feel like is the maybe slightly newer energy that you're feeling from this music you've recorded?
It feels like a really energetic time for women, where suddenly they were being heard and being allowed to be heard and educated, and there was such a creative buzz, and at the time many of them actually were very successful. This is what I'm finding with my research with women in all, not just France, that many of them had a lot of success in that time and have since been forgotten or written out of the history books, which is very interesting to me. That seems to be a pattern throughout my work. And so it was really important for us, and is for me in all my recital programs, to attempt to program in a sort of 50-50 gender split, rather than ghettoizing women, continuing the narrative. And I think a lot of programs in the recent past have been, a program of music by women, or creatively titled Her Song, or music from her voice and things like that. And I think it's time to retire that and start just programming women, because they're as good as men, and their music belongs on our programs. And so that's why, if anything, Debussy and Dupart might look a little bit token men on this program, but I think it was, a perfect combination of music. We didn't want to alienate listeners by doing a whole disc of unknown music, and I think we've really concentrated on the emotional themes and picked songs that fit with our themes of wanderlust and exploration and yearning to see the world, rather than a theme of songs by women.
Au ciel, le monde est à nous, et au Dieu.
So you found this kind of centre of Edwige Herchenroder wanting to explore her work. But what was the process then of putting the album together? Because I know you did some research, you went to Paris, the music library. How did you kind of choose the remainder of these songs and comprise the album?
Yeah, that was complicated, because French copyright laws are even more complicated than ours. So we had to choose songs from a certain period. We couldn't go for songs. I can't quite remember the details. Something about the wars, because it would have been so complicated with copyright laws. So and also it's complicated to get hold of the music that lives in the library. You have to book a slot. You have to choose 10 songs. That you can only take out 10 at a time. In fact, you can't take them out. You can look at 10 at a time. And before you go, you have to have booked those 10 songs that you want to have seen, and they'll get them out for you. And you can go in with gloves and look at them. So what I really would have liked to have done is gone and looked at everything, spent a whole day, looked at every song there, looked at the themes, chosen, the text that she'd used, and then made a decision. But actually we were faced with a great long list of titles, and we just had to make our decision on the 10 that we were going to look at that day, based on any that had the word sea in, or water, or travel, or something. And so it took several attempts and several visits to that library to see enough music for us to make some decisions. And then we settled on the themes, and went from there, picking out songs that we felt would complement that theme.
Are you someone that can read a score and kind of hear it in your head? Have you always been a sight singer person, or
No,
how do you?
not. And I think this is one of the issues, because we are campaigning for people to program women's music, and yet it's actually quite difficult to get access to have an idea of what the music sounds like, unless you are one of these geniuses who can just look at a dusty old paper manuscript from a library and go, yes, that's beautiful. But I don't think many of us are, certainly not singers. So we need a resource, or a central catalogue where you can get a real good idea of the sound world of these composers. And it's something that I'm trying to put together with my charity opera, alongside Oxford's International Festival of Song on their website. We've embarked on a lengthy project, years in the making it will be, doing just that, finding a woman, doing a biography that isn't just she was born in 1873 and she lived in Germany, but it's information about what her sound world is. Who does she sound like? Who would her songs be interesting to program with? Who she was taught by and therefore might sound a little bit like, and ideally clips so that you can actually hear the sound world and make your own decisions about that. so that we're not having to be sort of scholarly academics. And, people don't have time for that. If I'm building a program and I want to include women, then I need that to be as easy as possible.
And do you think that could be part of the reason why in the past we haven't had as many people kind of trying to uncover this music? Do you think that the copyright and the complexity has been a barrier for people?
I do, yeah. I don't think it's for want of trying. I don't think, I think there's a bit of an unconscious bias, or there has been in the past. But I don't think it's laziness, and I don't think it's sexism. I think it's just that it's difficult and it involves a lot of work, and not many people have that time. Students have more time, and therefore I'm as a teacher, I teach at the Royal College of Music and the Guildhall, and I'm observing that the younger generation are much better at this because they have the time and the passion to be investing this kind of research and exploring, and they're not so set in their ways. But once you're out in the profession, and you're juggling an opera career alongside song, which most song singers are, then you don't have time to do that kind of work. And so you'll program the songs that you already know or that are easy to access and learn. So I think this is some of the work that I'm doing is trying to make women's song more accessible to artists so that we can all start programming in a gender split rather than ghettoizing women or not programming women at all.
Making a premiere recording, which you have of both Marguerite Canal's La Flûte de Jade and also the music of Edwige Herchenroder, are you quite comfortable with kind of bringing the first recorded interpretation, or do you feel like an amount of pressure there? How do you kind of go about coming up with your version, the version that is kind of the first on record?
We're thrilled that that's the case. Yeah, it's been since we decided to program that one, we've been saying to Chandos, right, we need to get this out before somebody else records it. It's been a race to get it out so that we can claim that, because we're so proud to be able to claim that. It's entirely ours, which is very unusual. I haven't listened to anybody else's interpretation in order to learn it. I haven't been influenced by anybody else's interpretation. It was a totally blank canvas for us, and that was a thrill. And to be able to find texts that two composers that had taken the same text source and responded to it differently is always fascinating to me. So it was the same. We've also programmed the Bility songs of Debussy, which are absolutely iconic and well known, and everybody sings them, and the Rita Straw, which are less known and very different, but beautiful. And really, I think that's the gem for me. I'm most excited by them. I absolutely love those.
It's really interesting you say that, because I almost felt like the Straw was a part of the album that felt very different. Like a lot of them have this kind of French sonority, but the Straw is kind of like, there's a kind of tenderness and it just feels like it catches you. She's doing things that you don't hear elsewhere. I don't know. I was really struck by that.
That's interesting. Yeah, they're very unapologetically romantic, I think, and almost schmaltzy, but without being cheesy. I think they're a really, if they're cheesy, then they're a really good, high quality artisanal cheese, is what I like to say about that kind of music. And I think they are unapologetically divine.
Ma mère ne croira jamais que je suis restée si longtemps à chercher ma ceinture perdue.
Tell me about working with Edwige Herchenroder. What's your kind of connection there, and how do you rehearse together, I guess? What is that connection like?
Yeah, it's been tricky because we live on opposite sides of the sea. She lives in Paris and I live in Bedfordshire. We met at the Aix-en-Provence festival. We were young artists there, HSBC laureates, and so we did a recital together through that when, I don't know, 100 years ago. And ever since then, she's been my go-to French coach whenever I've done any French repertoire, because she's absolutely brilliant, but usually via Zoom. And so when I reached out to her and said, I've got this idea for a French song album, what do you think? Do you want to come with me on this? Her response was, oh, what, as a coach, as a French coach? And I said, no, I want you to accompany me. So that was lovely. And we, obviously most of our correspondence from then on was via Zoom and on the phone, lots of emailing back and forth. But yeah, I went over to Paris a couple of times to go to the music library. She came over here. She came over several times so that we could rehearse together. I went over there for rehearsals. So it's been expensive and time consuming, but, a real passionate labour of love for us both, I think.
And is that relationship between pianist and singer, especially in song, what are you looking for in a partner in that sense?
Yeah, I hope my previous pianists won't be offended by the fact that I work with different people. I think some singers like to work with the same pianist always and are very loyal to them. And I do feel loyal in that I feel a slight sense of guilt when I work with somebody new, but I love that opportunity to work with different people. Different people bring different things. But the pianists that I work with are always very collaborative. It feels like a partnership. It doesn't feel like that they're accompanying me. It feels like we're a duo making music together. Both of us feel free to make comments and feedback with each other. And the great thing with Edwige was that we were both so excited and passionate about the project. It was never going to be a big money maker, recording these days isn't. It was always a labour of love. And we were both completely on board with it from the start and excited by it.
I am fascinated and have done a deep dive into these chansons de Melodies and the text. What can you tell me about the text and why were you interested in showing two different interpretations of this, first by Debussy and then by Stroll?
Well, yeah, as I say, I think that the Debussy songs are so iconic and such a sort of staple of the mezzo repertoire. I've been singing them forever. And to hear somebody else's response to them, and quite a different response, was fascinating to me. And the Debussy are so sort of sensual and complex, and they evoke a very, very visceral feeling to me that's completely different to the feeling that Stroll's settings give. As you mentioned earlier, hers are beautiful. They're very romantic, and they're just so different. And I find that really, really, really interesting. They're really lovely to sing in a totally different way to the Debussy, which is quite almost whispered and spoken, and the Stroll are far more lyric and romantic. So it was just an interesting thing for me to present two different interpretations of the same text.
I was kind of struck how it's, Debussy setting lesbian poetry, but written by a man. So, yeah, Louis.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's still, an immense sense of beauty and love and sensuality, but I think almost it feels like you're also reclaiming it by having a woman set this text and feel it for herself. I don't know if that's how you saw it, but
yeah, it's such a bizarre story behind it. This guy, I think it's Pierre-Louis, who attributed them to Sappho, his text, but it turned out to be rubbish. They were absolutely nothing to do with Sappho. They were inspired by Sappho, I guess, but certainly weren't hers. And so, it's this sort of slightly dingy. Yeah, I have this image of this slightly perverted old man sitting in his room fantasizing about lesbian poetry, but somehow producing incredibly gorgeous words. Some of the texts, the two texts that actually cross, the two texts that they both set on our album, are actually singing to a man anyway. So they're not actually sort of lesbian undertones at all. And then there are two that are different to each other. So the last in the Debussy set, and in fact, two other songs that Stroll set. The two of them didn't both set them.
The next kind of side by side we have is the Franz Toussaint, Le Flûte de Jade, which is a French translation of an anthology of Chinese poems. Tell me about how you came across this poetry and music, and how you kind of feel the text and music go alongside each other?
I think that was one of Edwige's discoveries. So I don't know how she knew those, but I think that Flûte de Jade is quite a famous and well-known set in France, not so much here. It comes from a beautiful little anthology. It's really worth Googling if you're listening. Illustrated, beautiful illustrated anthology of poetry. And I think, yeah, as I say, I think Edwige was aware of those and let me know that she had heard of these settings by Polignac, and then discovered that Canal had written settings, I think, through the library research. And so we were both really excited about that. I think none of them, I think I'm right in saying that none of them actually cross over. So they're all completely different texts to each other. I don't think Canal set any of the same texts as Polignac. They are actually Chinese texts that had been translated into French. On their own, they are absolutely beautiful songs, and really deserve to be on the album.
You have more coming with Chandos, of sort of this championing of women composers and, I guess, equality in classical song and classical music. I'm curious about your earlier career, and I often question myself as a musician as well, how I didn't ask sooner about the inequality, or even notice it. I feel like I didn't notice it. What do you feel when you were singing song programs as a younger singer? How do you look back on that time now that you're so dedicated to gender equality? Or do you see it as just a different person, a different time?
Yeah, exactly as you've described. I'm just fascinated that I never noticed. It never occurred to me. In all my, I've been obsessed with music since I was, I don't know, 9, 10. Or forever, but it never occurred to me that everybody that I listened to was a man. And all through music college, I was fascinated by song and spent hours in libraries searching for songs. And I never noticed that there were no women. So the first time I ever sang anything by a woman, I think, was when I did a program that Ian Burnside had programmed himself, and he'd included a song by Rebecca Clark, which I loved. And I remember thinking, oh, this is good. She's a woman, a woman composer. This is great. And then obviously I started my work with Swopra, and that's how I sort of got on this track. In fact, it was more a feeling of guilt and embarrassment that I was sort of shouting at people that there needed to be more gender equality in the industry, and still programming all male recitals. So I thought, right, well, I'm going to have to practice what I preach, and that's how it started. And at that time, it felt like a mountain because I had so much repertoire. It would have been really easy for me if somebody offered me a recital to put a program together in seconds and not even have to memorize it or do any practice on it because I knew it all so well. But instead, I set myself this task and had to then set off almost starting from scratch, learning a load of new music. And so that's been a labour of love too, with times I've cursed myself for that, but also absolutely loved the discoveries I've made.
What can you tell us about what's coming recordings wise?
Yeah, it's been a big year. I've had sort of manic year of productivity and recording like I haven't got much longer to live. So as I said, last year or a couple of years ago was a disc of that included some German women, Austrian women. This year is some French women and men, but I am focusing on some English female composers over the next year. The next 3 albums that are coming out over the next year will be focused on British women, which I'd say is probably my top passion. English song has always been my first love. So I have a complete vocal works of Rebecca Clark coming out in November on Signum Records, which will coincide with a whole day of celebrations at the Wigmore Hall of Rebecca Clark's life, chamber music and vocal music. And then with Chandos, I'll be doing a whole disc of Madeline Dring, who also studied at the Royal College of Music, who songs are woefully underknown. There's one song called The Song of the Nightclub Proprietress, which everybody did when I was at college. I don't know why, because I hate it. And I remember judging her entirely based on that one song and thinking, oh, I hate that song, so I'm not going to bother looking at her stuff. And actually, she has written a world of music that needs to be heard. Really spectacularly good songs, right up my street. So that one I'm really excited about. And then Vaughan Williams is my kind of the king of my heart and my desert island composer. So I am also doing a disc with Will Van of Vaughan Williams and his female pupils, students, women that were influenced by him. So that'll be Elizabeth McConkey and Grace Williams. I would have had Rebecca Clark as well, because she was influenced by him at the Royal College of Music, but I had just done a whole disc of her, so I wasn't allowed.
She's had her time. She's fine.
Yeah, I've done my work for her. I literally recorded every single one of her songs. So yeah, McConkey, Grace Williams, Madeline Dring, Rebecca Clark, they're all to come in the next year, and I really think that they're all really worth celebrating.
Oh, it's so fascinating to hear about the Vaughan Williams connection, because he was so supportive of these women.
He was, in a brilliant way, and they adored him. I've read some lovely letters between them talking about him, and it's lovely to read.
It's almost as if we didn't, or we kind of forgot them for a period of time after he died. He was kind of doing stuff, and then we kind of forgot. And it's great. I love that idea, because I think you'll also bring in the Vaughan Williams clan.
Yeah.
With that album. So God, I'm already like desperate to hear that.
It is, yeah. Well, that's the idea. You've got to bring people in somehow, and I think some people are not necessarily against the idea of discovering new music by women. It's just actually we're all a little bit shy about discovering new music. We know what we like, and if somebody says to you, you should listen to Elizabeth McConkey, and you don't know anything about her except that she was a 20th century female composer, you might think, I don't think that's for me. But if you say she was taught by Vaughan Williams, she was heavily influenced by him, her early stuff sounds a lot like his stuff, then she really went her own way in a very interesting way, then I would be much more interested to explore that, because I know that I love Vaughan Williams. So there's every possibility that I will love her too, as I do.
Well, Kitty Whately, it's been so lovely to chat to you about the album Horizons, which is out now on Chandos Records. And I look forward to seeing and hearing the next 3 albums of music.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That was La Chevelure by Rita Stroll from her Songs from Bility, with Kitty Whately and Edwige Herchenroder. Thank you for listening to the Gramophone Podcast. Please do leave us a rating or review if you've enjoyed this episode, and join us next week for another podcast.